Okay, good afternoon, everybody. This is my nightmare, having a bright light in my eyes and headphones on, so I don't really understand whether anyone can hear me or not. So little waves, yes, everyone can hear me. Lovely to see you all. Thank you so much for being here with us today at Reset Connect. I know London Climate Action Week is super busy for everybody, so please bed down. We've got 45 minutes. We've got some really interesting businesses and innovations to talk about with you today. Businesses in this room are all facing the same pressure. Regulation, investors and customers are asking the same question. Can you grow while designing out waste without blowing your margins? Now, the honest answer is the science to do it is arriving fast, and the harder question is whether we can actually make it, scale it and sell it. So that's what this panel today is about. I've got 3 people with me who are solving a different part of that puzzle, from the waste no one else will touch, to growing materials that replace plastic, to a national institute helping industry make the switch. So I'm going to do some introductions before we start. My name is Hannah Cox. I run the Better Business Network, which is a UK-wide community of businesses that want to make the world a better place. My members are the brands and buyers who will decide whether materials like these actually get used at scale. So this is a conversation I care about a lot. If you want to hear more about the network, we've got a stand over in the corner. I can chat to you afterwards. But I'm going to introduce each of our panel, and then we'll get into the real questions. And I'm very excited to say we've also got props for this one as well, so you can actually see some of the incredible stuff that they're doing. So firstly, I've got Paul Gillingham, CEO of Magical Mushroom Company. This is Paul here. Paul grows packaging from mycelium, the root structure of mushrooms, as a home compostable replacement for plastic foam. They take agricultural waste, grow it into moulded packaging in days, and it breaks down to absolutely nothing after use. It's a natural material going head-to-head with petrochemical packaging at scale, and he's got an example of this with him now. He can show you after the panel also. I've also got Anish here, Malpani, founder of Without, certified B Corp, making new materials from the waste of the recycling industry rejects here in the middle. He's things like crisp and chip packets and soil mixed textiles. He's a Yale Climate Fellow, featured on Business Insider and Shark Tank. And the clever part is not just the chemistry, it's a modular manufacturing model built to scale. And he does his work in Pune in India, which is where my grandma's from, which we found out before the panel, which is very exciting to have that connection. And at the end, we've got the wonderful Dr. Lorraine Ferris, Voice Fellow of the Henry Voice Institute, the University of Manchester. Lorraine is a fellow at the Henry Voice Institute, the National Centre for Materials Science, set up with government funding to help industry develop new and more circular materials. She specialises in industry circularity, from turning foundry waste into glass to low-carbon cement, or moving chemicals to polymers off fossil feedstocks. And she's recently become an academic after over 30 years in the industry. So we've got a panel of absolute experts here on the cutting edge of innovation. So Anish, for you first, you go after the waste that even recyclers refuse, chip packets and mixed textiles. So why have you chosen the hardest thing instead of the clean, easy stuff everyone else is competing for?
Oh God, it's so loud. It's so
I know,
weird.
it's really weird.
So it turns out that when we started Without, we started it with the idea of solving real social and environmental issues. When we researched the waste space, we found that, chips packets, chocolate wrappers, shampoo sachets, coffee pouches, anything that has multiple materials fused together, nobody recycles and nobody talks about it. Why? Because the manufacturer is like, hey, they're making a lot of money out of it. The recyclers can't recycle it. The collectors don't want to collect it because they don't know what to do with it. So it's the black sheep of the family. So yeah, we wanted to, our idea and goal is to fundamentally increase the value of waste that nobody wants. If you make this waste valuable, then you create incentives to collect it. And that's what led to the birth of Without.
Do you want to show everybody what you've bought, the kind of thing that you make with these crisp packets?
Yeah, so what our technology does is that it's not just like a simple conversion. We actually demetallize the multi-layered packaging, we delaminate it, we depolymerize it, the PET into its monomer, we ink it partially, and we give it a hot caustic wash. And then we separate it into 3 different feedstocks, which can be converted into different things. So like we make sunglasses from them, we make planter pots, and this technology, the same plant, the same manufacturing facility, works with the worst textiles as well. Because guess what? Textiles also are a combination of multiple materials fused together, inconsistent. So from chips packets and from textiles, we can make yarn. So this is like virgin grade, repolymerized textile grade yarn made from the worst textile. So yeah, we have 8 patents that govern this, and we've built our technology to scale. So yeah.
Amazing. And he'll let you see, but when you have the sunglasses, you can twist them, and they're really durable as well, aren't they? But you've not got enough hands. You need one extra hand to be able to show people that.
Yeah, like it doesn't break, right? So it's not just a gimmick. That's what we like to, it's actually good material, and we want to win on that. The story is great. Everybody loves our story. But can it actually scale? And we are right now in trials with one of the biggest manufacturers of eyewear in India, and we're like this close. We've been courting them for 3 years, so fingers crossed.
Fingers crossed. And Paul, for anyone who has not seen it, tell us a little bit about mushroom packaging and what you're trying to replace.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Hannah. Yeah, this is a piece of our mushroom packaging. Just before I talk about which client that is, we take agricultural waste, in the main hemp shivs, which is the woody core of hemp, also rapeseed in the UK, and we bind it with mycelium. So we sterilise it in our state-of-the-art factory, which can process 4 million kilos of hemp shivs a year. And then we cool it down and then introduce or inoculate the mycelium at a small percentage. And the mycelium we use, which is the root structure of mushrooms, for those that don't know, and it's an asexual genus of mycelium, so it will never fruit a mushroom. So we just use magical mushroom as a play on words. And then everything we do is bespoke, so we let that colonise for a number of days, and then we fill the moulded trays that we've got to shapes such as this. This is actually a kitchen company, protects their polystyrene, as replacement for polystyrene, protect their kitchen doors, and we've got a contract for 6 million pieces of these now. So we are doing it on an industrial scale. We founded in 2020. We've learned a lot over those years, and in terms of recycling waste, what we've learned, because we have made mistakes over the years, but we've kept everything we've ever rejected. So we've got 500 pallets of it. So even at a high yield we get now at 95%, but that's a huge value to us now. Now we can reprocess it. So we've just grown a bar for HSBC for Blue Earth Summit, and all that was waste material we used, which we inoculated with mycelium. So those that are going there tonight can see it. So unlike cardboard and certainly polystyrene, we can recycle this in perpetuity. So we advocate getting it back rather than, composting or biodegrading naturally within 50 days at end of use.
That's amazing. Our connection is you've also done some amazing stuff at some music festivals as well, haven't you?
We have, yeah. So we do go beyond packaging and more increasingly. And last year at Glastonbury, we did 25 2-metre acoustic discs to keep the acoustics within a dance tent at Glastonbury, which was there quite a lot. And it works.
Brilliant. Love that. And Lorraine, Voice is the National Centre for Materials Science. For a business in this room trying to develop a new material or to go circular, what do you actually do for them?
The Henry Royce Institute was set up about 10 years ago with government funding to address the needs of the UK economy to develop new materials. We cover the whole range of materials. So although on this stage today we're focused mostly on polymers or polymer replacements, the Henry Royce Institute also covers metals, complex materials like nanomaterials, graphene, medical materials, as many materials as you can think of, nuclear materials. Sorry, I should have memorised the list, shouldn't I? But I didn't do. We cover all materials. I want to emphasise that. We are an institute that consists of 12 university organisations or research organisations in partnership, so that from doing that we cover a lot of different expertise. It isn't just the University of Manchester where I'm based. The University of Manchester is the headquarters of the Henry Royce Institute. We deliver lots of research either as research collaborations with industry, or else sometimes it's through government schemes whereby we're allowed to offer short pieces of research and development and support to businesses for little or no cost, depending on the size of the company. Sometimes for SMEs, it has actually been free sometimes. Some of the downside of working with universities is often because you might have a favourite professor who you define some work with, and they need to get a postdoc to do the work, and they have to recruit somebody or get somebody at the end of their contract. We actually employ experienced researchers at the postdoctoral level in a new role within university circles called application scientists. And each of these people has developed a specialism in materials science so that they are there for when we get requests from industry to look at a particular type of materials issue. We also have something called the SME Access Scheme. So if you are a UK SME, you can ask for access, whereby we can make a certain number of measurements or a small study on your behalf that's free of charge. It's usually up to about £25,000 worth of testing. So it's quite a valuable offer if anybody wants to reach out to me on that. I'm a fellow at the Henry Royce Institute, which also is a new role that they set up within the Institute, which is to bring in people with industry experience who can go out and relate to and speak to industry. So I tend to work with people from industry, understand their problems, really get my head around it, and try to bring together collaborations. So for instance, I initialised a national LCA network, which some of you may have come across, and I'm currently working with foundry industry, steel industries. I'm working with some chemical companies with novel surfactants. I work with all kinds of things. And I would encourage you, because I'm going to leave very promptly at the end of this session, I'd encourage any of you that are in any way interested, there's nothing to lose by reaching out to me and having a quick chat on Teams after this event.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Really, really useful to understand all the different ways businesses can get support. So it sounds that science actually rarely is the blocker here. It's the markets that is blocking everything. So what do you think the single biggest barrier is then for your materials being used more?
I think responsibility is on us. I think Anesh will agree, and I know that it's been my mission since the start, really, that the only way you can really scale it is by, getting the price parity. There's no doubt. And that's, we've been turning clients away. So we got one very large one, but that was unprofitable. So the goal was to make that profitable by putting the various levers of profitability that we have, which, raw materials, whether that raw materials plant we've opened cost 2 million, but it brings the price of raw materials down by 3/4. So that investment will be repaid quite quickly. And then there's the labour costs, and so all the things that you'd expect. So we've managed to do that now. Built a huge factory, and I think the second thing is that the sustainability flag is we fly last. We keep people safe first because we run factories, and then it's investor shareholder returns. The incumbent product we replace has to be as good or better, has to be the same price, and finally it's biodegradable, unlike the product we're trying to disrupt. So now we've got there, then it's just really onboarding more, really. And then it comes down to three things: the price, technically the price, and then can you supply? So it then becomes a supply risk and contracts. But I think the more adoption there are, the easier it is to scale. But really, the responsibility is on the people that, like our company, that wants to disrupt, and you have to meet those measures, otherwise, because the market will decide.
Yeah, the market will decide. Do you agree, Anish?
Yeah, no, I think price parity, matching on price, quantity, quality, consistency, and scale, right? You do that and people switch. One thing we've learned is that science and innovation is different. Science, you can probably recycle or make any new material in the lab, and it's easy, almost. It's possible. The hard thing is, how do you make that financially viable? That's innovation. Because if it's very easy to publish it's easier to publish a paper than to take a technology and scale it from lab to market. And I think that's what's been harder without. Like, our goal from the beginning has been to make sure that the materials at scale are at price parity with virgin materials. And I think that's what we're really excited about, and that's what we've cracked, is that we've been able to get to that. And this is where it gets really interesting. Like, recently, we launched pots, like planter pots, with the biggest plant seller in India. And we matched price. The pots were beautiful. And we gave them the quantity that they wanted. Now, what was interesting was that because the pots were beautiful, because they weren't because it was the same price as everything else, people who don't care about sustainability loved them even more, because they're like, oh wow, cool pot, affordable, and it's good for the earth. Whereas if it was expensive and it was not very good and it broke, then they'd be like, oh, stupid sustainability. I don't care about sustainability, it's shit, right? So we think it's very sensitive. If you match price and quality, then you're going to get so much more goodwill as a brand, because you're doing something that is good for the earth, but not at the cost of price and quality.
So you're talking about winners will not be whoever has like the cleverest material, but actually the demand, and does it fit the market? So do you all agree that bottleneck is demand, not invention? What do you think, Lorraine?
I really want to come in and reply to the
Yeah,
two
sure, go
previous two
ahead.
speakers, because I love everything that both of their companies are doing. It's absolutely fantastic. But can I say, from a broader industry and societal perspective, they are operating in particular niches where they solve particular niche problems. I've been working with different companies and different academics on a very wide basis, including sort of initiatives at the Royal Society to look at defossilisation of polymers and chemicals in general. It's a big problem, and if we can find a way of addressing that through different routes, like a biological material route for some of the applications, and like a really clever recycling route for some of the other applications, that's great. But at the moment, it's like you've got a sort of a 1,000-piece jigsaw or something, and you've each got a piece of it. There's a lot more to address and a lot more to do. I also got to argue a little bit with Hannah. It's always good, isn't it, to
I'm just the moderator.
disagree with the moderator. But it's not that everything has been solved and it's just about scale up. There's still, sorry, Anish, there's still some science could help to make the next breakthrough to kind of get that sort of scalability effect where we're not reliant upon petrochemicals anymore and the Straits of Hormuz and things like that. We still need some scientific breakthroughs. What I would say is that, speaking as an ex-industry person that's now working in academia, I totally get it. I totally get it that whatever you do make or invent has got to go through the whole innovation cycle and be scalable. Very often there are great inventions that are not scalable. And equally, you can spend an awful lot of money doing academic projects that don't lead you anywhere because they've not got the right kind of drive and push to take it all the way through the innovation cycles. So I'm agreeing and disagreeing with you on things, if that makes sense.
Yeah, totally.
And to answer your question about the demand part, yeah, sorry, we missed that. But
Oh, good.
I don't think it's a demand problem. I think people will switch. They just want price, quality, quantity, and consistency. And those are not easy things to get. It's a no-brainer for them to switch. I think a lot of sustainable brands ask a lot. A lot of sustainable materials companies ask a lot from brands. Hey, pay us 2x more. Have patience with us. The properties won't meet. I'll give you an example. Switching from plastic packaging to, let's say, paper packaging in the rain, that's terrible, right? So in the end, the brand is like, I want to be sustainable, but if my product is getting damaged in the rain, then that's the end, right?
Yeah.
It doesn't matter how sustainable it is.
You have anything to add to that, Paul?
Yeah, I mean, I think sometimes it gets forgotten that there's inventions everywhere, and this material has been around a while, but we forget about the people because they're just factories and it's a material. What's most important, as a leader, you have to have a vision, then your job is to persuade people to come and help you deliver that vision. And that is probably the hardest part, to bring people out, and also probably the most joyful part as well. I mean, I've got a team of three, actually, fortunately, lucky 3 female engineers that are really changing this business and at quite a pace. And the engineering part for me is the most important part. And since we've evolved that team, then we are moving at quite a pace. So I think the people is really the most important thing to me. Once the science is, we can always iterate the science, and we're doing a 3-way university project with Nottingham, Bath and Swansea. So, and I've got 4 scientists, so we're always conscious of that, just like the engineering. But, the people and leading them and recruiting up is the way to scale our particular products anyway.
So going back to what Lorraine was saying about partnerships, where do you think these partnerships then need to lie? So to go from these kind of pilots to scalable solutions within the industry, is it innovators, big brands, government, academics? I'm not expecting the answer, but just where's your viewpoint in this? Where do you see there's some real gaps in what needs to be done?
I think to some extent all of the above, but at the end of the day, I think you do need an entrepreneur who grasps hold of something and has the vision and drive and wants to follow it through. It can start in a broader collaboration. It can start with collaboration with universities and public sector and all kinds of things. But to actually implement something, I think you need a driving figure, an entrepreneur figure, definitely. So I do respect everything that you guys are doing. saying there's a lot more to
It
do.
would be very boring if
agree.
you all gave
I
the same
agree.
answer.
I could totally agree. Yeah, and a grant can start that process, but the profitability in the business, you've got to have that drive. And if it feels glamorous, then you're not scaling. That's what I would say.
And what we found is that I think collaboration is easy to say. It's really hard to do sometimes. You really want to find win-win relationships. They'll never be 50-50, but as equal as possible is really important because sometimes they suck a lot of time out. And if they're not win-wins, then somebody suffers. And as a startup, like so many other we have invested a lot of money in science and building our own lab. We have we have 8 scientists who work with us. We have a team of 50. But then the other startups will come to us and like, hey, can you do this research for us? And I'm like, we are barely making any money, So it's I don't want to be rude, but
Yeah.
there is a bit of like, we have limited time and resources. Truly finding win-win collaboration. I'll give you an example. One of my fellow Yale Climate Fellows was an entrepreneur who made sodium-ion batteries, and for our final project, we made an enclosure made from chips packets. So this was the world's first sodium-ion battery enclosed in an enclosure made from packets of chips. Now this was truly a win-win. Like he's a small startup, he can't do, it's hard for him to buy enclosures, and for us, we don't have a big capacity yet. So and those collaborations were like really good, and it's truly win-win. And no one's doing each other anyone a favor.
Nice. I've got some individual questions for you because I want to do a little bit of a deep dive before we get into it because you're all coming from completely different backgrounds. So Lorraine, I'm going to start with you first. So you turned foundry salt into glass and waste concrete into low carbon cement. You have said before that the technical part is not the hardest part, but building a supply chain that rewards everybody is. Could you just explain what you mean by that?
Well, in those 2 particular examples, in the cement recycle example, I wouldn't say it's not established. It's kind of state of the art. It's the forefront of things, but it is accepted that you can recover cement paste, you can carbonate it, you can upcycle it. And the vision for that, for me, that makes me really excited, is that demolition waste is the largest volume waste, certainly in Europe and probably globally. And it's really exciting, the prospect that you could take the majority of that and basically crunch it up and separate it and make some new cement out of it. And cement has a very high carbon footprint. So that's really exciting. But it's kind of at the stage now where how on earth do you implement that? So I'm bringing together a project where we're going to work with various cities across Europe and try to actually develop the supply chains within 3 or more distinct cities to make that happen. So we have to have the technical and industry partners, but equally we have to have city authorities, demolition partners, etc., etc. On the other example that you cited, which was taking the waste sand from foundries into glass, that also is all about a supply chain. I've had particular difficulties. I hope there's nobody in the audience that was part of that because I might be insulting them here, but I've had particular difficulties with many people from both the foundry sector and the glass sector sitting in workshops with me and grumbling on about you can never make it happen. People in established activities, established companies, established industries, I think they're often very comfortable with the status quo and they're not ready to just make it happen. You've got to have a can-do attitude, and it's very difficult to get a supply chain of people together that cover that supply chain that have all got that attitude and want to work together.
Yeah. Do you have any challenges within your own supply chains that you think could add to that, either of you?
Like one perspective I have about our waste is that we don't want the waste for free. I mean, we'll take it for free, but free is not scalable. So how do you factor in the cost of the waste so that as you scale, you're not not relying on subsidies or you're not relying on EPR to survive. So yeah, I think that's how I look at. And we're taking the waste nobody wants. Like even the mafia doesn't want our waste. So there's a bit of like at least in the beginning, it's not going to be hard to get. But as we scale, how do we value that?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we just we're a year through it. We won an Innovate UK Smart grant for $500,000, and that's to disrupt white goods. So we can't commercialise it until after it. So we're well through with that work, and one of our partners is Beko. So as the EPR comes through, we've got the traffic light system. So it's a bit of chicken and egg for us because we inherently it's a recyclable product, but the supply chain route doesn't exist for our products. So that's a challenge for persuasion to on board because they don't want to remove one problem and replace it with another. So that's something we're working on and lobbying, and we're doing quite well with it. But that's certainly a challenge for us. We can do it. We can get the price. We can certainly do a product just as good as polystyrene. But it's now persuading DEFRA that we are in the green camp and not other.
Not other. So talking about that, keep on you there, Paul. What's the hardest part of scaling a growing living material to industrial volumes and consistency then?
It's just that you haven't got off-the-shelf engineering equipment that you can use, so it's all proprietary. I've taken on leaders, people that have worked for motor industry that have been senior, but you need people that can make this equipment, which is proprietary. It's got less value on the market, but it's huge value to us, particularly around IP. So these engineers I've spoken about, they don't just find things off the shelf, they build them, and they build labs. And finding those people has taken some time, but that's the hardest thing because it doesn't exist.
Okay. I'm going to come on to you then, Anish. I've got here that innovation is the manufacturing model, not just the chemistry. So I want you to talk through this modular plant idea, and I don't understand. So what does own a few, license many mean through scaling?
Fair enough, yeah. So when I say modular plants, similar to Paul, the technology that we have, you can't buy off the shelf. There might be some components you can buy, but like overall, it's proprietary, which is a good thing and a bad thing. But the way we want to scale is that we want this one unit to be modular. So the same recycling unit can handle multi-layered packaging as waste streams. It can handle textile waste, mixed worse textile waste. It can handle Tetra Pak. It can handle colored PET bottles. And so what this does is that it gives, quote unquote, the buyer of this technology flexibility. And it's like a jigsaw. I'm going to use your that we can piece together, or like a train actually, right, with multiple bogies. So if somebody wants, and each of these units can be like 10 tons per day. If you want to build a 100 tons per day plant, you have 10 of these units you attach together. Now the beauty of this is that let's say you get a lot of textiles one day, and you want to use 6 of these units per textiles instead of 2, you should have the flexibility to do that. And the other reason why this is helpful is because if one of the units fails, then you have the other unit as backup as well. So we see in large recycling facilities, single points of failure. A single leakage in a big reactor and the whole thing fails. So how do you keep things modular? How do you keep things, you diversify and you, and also, yeah, and at the same time you keep them modular. And the last thing about that is, as we scale now, our engineering, procurement, and construction partners or ourselves, we can churn out these units. And then they can be sold to different people depending on how big a plant they want to build. And that's what, so when it comes to own a few and license a few, what I mean by that is that I don't think it's worth selling something that you don't build and use yourself. So we want to build our first few plants. And then the fastest way to scale this technology is to franchise it like McDonald's, right? Like you're kind of having strict SOPs on quality control, but that's the way to go. So our goal is to make 170 plants by 2040, out of which 10 would be ours, but 160 would be people from different parts of the world. But we will never stop making, iterating, and improving technology because technology doesn't stop. And Paul will agree. Like you keep iterating, right? So we have these centralized R&D labs that will constantly improve the technology.
Yeah, what's your approach, Paul?
Just to add to that, I completely echo Anish's approach to that because if you get it in the wrong hands in our equipment, so we wouldn't do a JV because then they get your IP. I probably wouldn't do a license either for similar reasons. If it gets in the wrong hands, you can completely discredit the material. So the franchise model would be for us. It's either we open loads of plants and have to keep raising money, or we franchise it and people run their own business. And that's probably the way that we will go. But exactly the same as yourself, and we would keep our plant open and keep iterating because it will be a pack and we'd be auditing. So same approach.
And Lorraine, what are your thoughts on that?
I wanted to actually give back a question to my 2 colleagues on the panel to say, what's the limitation there? Is it actually the raising of massive amounts of capital to expand globally? And let me finish. because I'm not sure I've got a complete decision on this. I'm not sure what I think of it. But the traditional model in, say, the chemicals and many other materials sectors was to have global dominant big corporations that had plants in most countries in the world. That's a really weird noise in the background. And I'm not sure whether that's a better model or whether you're better franchising. I don't know. Is part of the franchising model actually part of your almost social mission, that you're giving people sort of part ownership of their own gaff in some ways, aren't you, by doing that? What do you think of that?
We are, but I think you talked about global dominance. So the purpose of what we do isn't for global dominance. It's to make a difference to the world and disrupt a very toxic material. So to be able to scale that is much easier for me to do that and only to do it through franchise system. Potentially, we haven't fully decided yet, but certainly on lots of factories around the world. And there is a bit about the social. Let people they know the territory, know the people, and they know the governance of their own countries. But we're not doing this for global dominance. We're doing this because we want to disrupt, a toxic material.
Can I say that I'm not imagining that's your main motivator, global dominance, but one of the reasons for global dominance is that within the capitalist system, that's what's tended to happen, is that even, say, within the chemicals industry, if you get a novel company in Belgium or somewhere that happens to invent a new polymer and they set up and they grow and grow and grow a bit, eventually one of the big guys just comes and buys them out. And it becomes part of, not that I've got anything against BASF, but it becomes part of BASF or somebody, And that's just what has happened in the past. And also, if you don't have protection on your IP and on your operations, which the operation itself is sometimes quite difficult to protect by just pure IP law. Sometimes it could be, and maybe you don't mind this, maybe you're such sort of generous people that you don't mind if somebody else comes in and sets up a crisp packet sort of recycling manufacturing down the road from you and kind of competes with you. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it would be a good problem to have, I guess, in some ways. That means we're doing something right. But I think it's more complex than that. A big part of our strategy on the franchising is well to build a brand. So our brand, Made Without, is supposed to be like an ingredient brand, like the Intel inside of material science. So at some point, you might be able to copy our technology, but can you build that brand value, the brand association that we are investing time and energy into, as one way of separating ourselves? I don't know if we'll be successful in that or not. Our head of marketing is sitting here. Let's see what he thinks about that. But I think that's really important. It becomes a differentiator because, like, the BASF of the world are just like chemical companies. They're boring. We have a story, and that matters.
Can I say that they often will maintain a brand of an independent that they've bought out because they recognise that there's some brand value?
I mean, just to add to that, number one, we would never sell to BASF or any polystyrene company. That will never happen. Secondly, the 700 million tons of polystyrene produced a year. So for every ton that we displace, we avoid 5.7 tons of CO2 emission. That's by 2 official academic LCAs. And the third thing about the IP, you have to take it seriously. And I've got, I've got a case, an IP file, a design that someone has breached. It's filed at the Intellectual Property Office at the High Court. I paid £10,000 for that, and I won that case. So you have to do it all, fortunately.
You have to, but it doesn't always protect everything.
Yeah, and in the end, maybe I'm naive, but I think there's something about being really good at operations and kind of having those relationships, building for the long run. I'll give you an example, and it's something I haven't spoken about a lot, but a big part of our work is also with informal waste workers. So India has 4 million waste pickers who live really poor lives. We graduate them out of poverty into dignified manufacturing roles. And we pay them 2x what they were making in the past. They have stock options in the company. They have health insurance, how to use health insurance, flexible work hours, paid leave. And then when somebody comes and talks to us, like, Anish, great story, bravo, but, isn't this expensive? Isn't this isn't it impacting your margin? And it is, right? We're paying more. You could have hired 3 skilled laborers for 1.5 people that we hire. But here's the interesting thing. It's been 3 years since some of them have been working with us. We have close to 0% attrition in our manufacturing team, which is unheard of in India. Number 2, they are motivated and learning and actually believe this is part of their company. They own a part of the company. So their productivity, when they need to stretch and push, comes without us having to be exploitative. You know what I mean? They're like, oh my God, well, this order needs to go. And then the third thing is that we're finding that brands like L'Oreal and Volvo care about ethical, transparent supply chains as much as sustainable materials. Right? That again becomes a moat that it's very hard to replicate, and it takes years for us to do this, right? So I mean, yeah, there's no. I mean, somebody wants to copy us, you can, and we'd be like, big, copy. I mean, imitation is the best form of flattery in some ways, right? So, but yeah.
And do you find the same as well, Paul, with how you look after your staff and team? Do you approach it in a different way because
We
of
have
that?
very similar values, and we've given stock options out. I've given a certain percentage of my own shares. We've given out, so everyone's got. So we've always had the living wage, and that's the same with the government now. So, but we were advanced of that. And it's the same. We don't get people leave. Our absence levels for manufacturing, one of our key KPIs, is almost zero, which again is unheard of in manufacturing. And that just shows that the engagement, and there are lots of similarities. And we hadn't met before this, had we? There's lots of similarities, and giving people that respect and involvement in the business and a share, then definitely helps with productivity.
But we have to go back to what we were talking about before. It's great how you're looking after your teams, but it's about the materials and actually the scale of that to market. So when we're talking about polystyrene particularly, Paul, let's go back to you. Cost, regulation, customer pressure, what's the thing that's going to make a big brand switch away from polystyrene to your product, do you think?
As I said earlier, there's three things: the technical performance, the price, and can we supply it? And in terms of mass adoption, of course, then there's a lot of grants given out by the UK government or governments in the EU, and I think sometimes they're rolling the dice a bit, really, and particularly with the onset of AI. So there's a lot of well-written grant applications now. So the level's going up, but is the quality of the company going any higher? Probably not. So I think Innovate UK will probably, I think they may be looking at backing companies that could be British successes rather than investing in companies that are just seeing it as some money for a grant. So I think that's an important thing. And the only other thing I'll say in terms of legislation is that companies over a certain amount of turnover have to have their accounts audited, and I think it should be the same with sustainability reports. They're nice and glossy and thick, busy, but I think once they're published, no one gives them a second look. So I think that auditing process would make a massive difference to adoption.
Yeah, I totally agree. Lorraine, you've talked a lot about moving from chemicals and polymers off fossil feedstock. So what do you think are the realistic routes with that?
Well, these two guys represent two potential routes. There's been lots of reports written about defossilization, as they call it, moving away from petrochemicals and the chemical supply chain. And the classic things that get focused upon are recycling of existing chemicals and polymers, which we've got here. But then recycling of polymers, it's a massive subject. I've got Anish sort of nodding and grimacing there, yeah. It's a massive subject because there's a lot of different polymers and they're mixed up in a lot of different ways and things. Another classic way is to go to bio-derived, but a lot of the work looks at doing bio-derived to plug into the existing chemical supply chain. And what I like about your work at Magical Mushroom is that it's not like a plug-in to the existing chemical supply chain, and you're actually making something that's functional but that doesn't have a lot of the downsides of, say, polystyrene in terms of pollution, both at end of life and also in production. It's a very hazardous process involving hazardous chemicals for people to manage. So there's a lot of good things off it. The third route forward is based upon carbon capture, and again going through the classic sort of chemical supply chain where you've replaced critical feedstocks from petrochemicals with those derived from carbon capture, but that's very energy intensive. There's a lot of work still to do on the technology. I think ultimately all of the above is what's going to be both needed and what's going to supply different niches and different angles. You know my 1,000-piece jigsaw? We've got a couple of pieces here on the stage. There's going to be, another 998 sort of innovations and pieces of jigsaw that will get filled in so that we can all continue to live our modern standard of living that we expect with all of these different materials. However, if we had another hour to talk about, we could talk about consumption as well. So maybe we've got to consume a bit less of it, but...
Well, I think we could all probably agree with that as well. But I wanted to ask you that question because we have to acknowledge there's some great materials coming out, new innovations, but we are currently living on a foundation of fossil fuel derived products, and we need to change that massively. So on that, a few closing thoughts. I've got two questions. You can answer both of them, or you can choose one if you feel really strongly about a subject. So first one is, what's one thing someone listening to this talk could do on Monday mornings to start designing waste out of their supply chain or their business? Or if the government did one thing to accelerate this, what should it be? And the reason I want to hear from you, like, what do you think business could do or government could do? If you've got an answer for both, great. If there's one you really think should be leading the charge on this, I'd like to hear. But I definitely think that a lot of businesses won't do things unless legislation is put in place for them, especially talking to businesses that, like talking to you two, for example, you're thinking holistically about how you're approaching your businesses, and lots of businesses don't. It's purely based on commercials and profits. So what do you think should be done?
I'll just quickly add to what I said earlier about the legislation or potential legislation for auditing sustainability reports and giving a RAG, red, amber, green score to that company against the sustainability reports, because then that would make a massive difference. And I see it, like I do most of the large closing of orders, so I see it and I see where people want to adopt, and it's always at the very top. It's at the CEO or board level that want to change. They'll allow a bit of a higher price for a while, that green premium as we call it, but not long term. But if they are scored and end users and clients can see what score they are, a bit like that, food establishments have a score where 1 to 5 on the doors, then it can help make more informed decisions about what they purchase.
Definitely. Anish?
I have a slightly different perspective on this. Global climate change, or global warming and then climate change, has been like going on from the 1970s. And we've been yelling and screaming and calling people out and being really negative about it. And I don't think it's significantly helped to solve the problem. One other thing with climate change is that we keep adding more friction to people. Like, don't do this, don't consume less. And I think people in this room, we're singing to the choir, like they're okay with it, right? But the majority is not going to change. So my perspective more is that how do you make climate interventions frictionless or easier? So more than getting businesses to do things, how can we incentivize businesses to do things so it makes their life easier? I think that might be a more realistic approach to solving this in the long run. And that's what we're trying to do, right? So yeah, I don't have a clear answer. It would be great to have proper legislation, and it'd be good that, companies are more particular about the materials they use and are, use less variety of materials, be consistent and, try and look at. But I think the overall goal is how can innovation and help make climate change, adaptation, or mitigation frictionless.
Yeah, and I guess that's not just materials or legislation,
Everything.
It's also about behavioural change, right? Yeah. Lorraine?
I really like Anish's concept of sort of frictionless incentives, because when you think about that sentence, there's almost like a contradiction within it, that the reason that governments bring about incentives, sometimes it's as a barrier, sometimes it's an incentive, is to try to bring about change. And sometimes it's to try to make the economics work, where a new technology, when it's first developed, the economics don't stand up on their own. And it's a really complex area at the moment, and we've all got things like, some of you might be aware of CBAM that's coming in, carbon border adjustment mechanisms. There's things like, we've had lots of arguments about the plastic packaging tax in recent years and things like this. I did actually work as a Whitehall advisor for a year in the Department of International Trade about 3 or 4 years ago, and I don't think I'm breaking my confidentiality agreement with them when I say this, but what I would like to say is that Whitehall could be a little bit more reactive and listen to people and be prepared to react faster when industry is feeding back to them. I really do think that they should be able to react a bit faster. But I do also have some sympathy with them, because you don't want to be kind of sailing a ship from left to right and all over the place, It's a really, really tricky area. And you need to coordinate internationally so that you don't make British businesses uncompetitive compared to other regulatory areas. What's happening at the moment in Europe, as opposed to the EU, because I include the UK and Europe, in the UK and EU, at the moment, we're having a lot of site closures of manufacturing companies, and a lot of them are saying it's energy prices and the regulatory environment that's causing that. So it's a really, really difficult thing to manage. You asked me for one thing that I would change. Gosh, I'd wave a magic wand and make the world. I'd like to teach the world to sing. I'm going to break out in song. Anyway, make the world kind of coordinate and agree on sort of baseline sort of acceptability of practices. But that's a big wish, I think.
It's a very big wish. I don't think it's going to be achieved in the next year either. Do we have any questions from the audience for our panellists? Lorraine has to leave very quickly. If anyone's got a particular question for Lorraine, we can take that one first. Got a question at the back there. Fantastic. I think she's just grabbing a microphone for you. Or you can take my mic if you like. Oh, we're getting there. There you go. Wonderful. Thank you. Feel free to say that your name and the name of your business as well before you ask your question.
Sure. So I'm Pam and I work for Castrol in engine oils. And I think this question is probably best suited to Anish, but happy for Paul and Lorraine to speak up as well. I was just wondering if you'd done any testing for packaging, like for engine oils. I don't know whether your product is good for that. And then I do have a second question around the waste recycling, because I know that engine oil bottles can be particularly difficult to recycle, but there's also like bag in box. I don't know which one is actually better for trying to recycle.
Great that you asked the question. We should connect after this, but we're talking to Maruti, Mahindra, TVS. They all supply engine oil bottles, and they all want to switch to our bottles. We make bottles from our packaging. So our material has passed migration tests that we've been able to blow mold bottles that can replace HDPE bottles essentially. So yeah, I mean that's what the recycling is focused on. When it comes to recyclability of the bottles that you're talking about versus pouches, I think HDPE is one of the easiest materials to recycle. And I think after PET, that's what's going to be next. That it's going to be highly recycled. I think the problem becomes the engine oil is very corrosive. So how does it damage the fundamental molecule of the polyethylene? But I think our technology can handle it. Whereas pouches are multiple materials. I think the bag-ins, if I'm correct, I don't know if you're talking about bag-ins that come in with like a metallized pouch. Is that what you're talking about?
So it's a plastic bag, and then it comes in a carton, so a cardboard box.
Yeah, those are really difficult. I mean, Tetra Pak claims it's easy to recycle those, but generally it's very hard to recycle those because they have it's generally got a layer of aluminium, 5% of aluminium, 70% of cardboard, and 20% of polyethylene. It's really hard to recycle that. HDPE is much easier. So I think you're seeing a lot of these refill movements that are coming up, like L'Oreal's doing a big one right now. But it's ironic because the refill packaging is metallized multi-layer plastics. It's not easy to recycle that. You might as well just get HDPE bottles instead, or PET bottles because they're monomaterials and easier to recycle. I don't know if I answered your question though.
No, you did. That was a great answer. Thank you very much.
Any of our panelists have anything else to add to that? No. Any more questions from the audience? I can see a hand in the middle just here.
Hi, thank you for the really great panel. I'm Devika and I work in alternative proteins, so not exactly materials, but I was really interested in the mycelium side of things. I wanted to understand how much are you backwards integrated into the cultivation of mushrooms, and how do you kind of maintain quality at scale?
Yeah, thanks for the question. Great question. It's probably the only vertical that we won't do, actually. And I say that because it's the most important part of the recipe, but it's also the very smallest. So in terms of commercial scale and how we can impact the bottom line, then we wouldn't. So we leave that to the experts because it's, we're talking low-digit percentage that we use in the mix, and it's coming down more and more. But that's not to say we don't treat it the most important. We have a lab dedicated, an ISO 7 lab dedicated to that very subject. So the magic all happens there. And we've got a skilled team making sure that it's inoculated. And we can't even use our microbiologists to release it for 4 days until we've done the plate test. So the answer is, we leave that to the experts.
Thank you, Paul. Any more questions from the audience? Wonderful. Well, you should have seen on the screen the names of all our panellists today if you want to get in touch with them afterwards. Thank you to Lorraine, Anish and Paul. Can I have a round of applause for our panel today. Thank you.